Good morning and welcome to the Irish NFL Show. My name is Shane Brennan. Thank you for joining me and Colin Cronin today as we review the first round of NFL playoff action. This is the greatest time of the year. Last night we saw the Dolphins completely outclassed in the cold by the Chiefs, and we saw the Houston Texans have absolutely no problems dealing with the Cleveland Browns. Uh, I think there's two games where I think the gulf in class was quite evident on the pitch. I'm going to start with the Dolphins playing against the Chiefs because this is a rematch of a game we saw in Germany earlier on in the year. There's a lot of question marks about how the Dolphins would react after losing the last game of the season against the Buffalo Bills. A lot of question marks, I think, throughout the entire season as to whether the Chiefs' perceived offensive slump that happened in the middle of the regular season would carry into the offseason. But I think it was quite clear from the start of the game the Dolphins just were ran out of ideas pretty quickly. Could not get the ball run through the middle of the field. We're quite obviously missing a lot of guys in the defense. I believe they were missing 4 linebackers with a combined total of 25 sacks to injury before we even came into the game. The Chiefs knew how to run the ball through the middle. The Dolphins didn't. And in the end, the Kansas City managed to come away with a 26-7 win. I think it was quite a good start for Kansas City going into the postseason, where for the first time in the Patrick Mahomes era, they might need to play away from home.
Yeah, I mean, look, this probably went the way most people felt that it was going to go. Understandably, the Dolphins fans had optimism that maybe they could get it going with their running game, but their running game really struggled. The team really struggled. The passing game struggled. The defense struggled. And you're right, like they were missing an awful lot of pieces on defense in particular. They're really banged up. But this is a problem that the Dolphins seem to have year in, year out, Shane. That is the kind of worry that you would have is like, can these players, stay healthy? Because, you know, Bradley Chubb, I think this is his 4th ACL injury. He had one in college. He did a couple of injuries with the Broncos. That would be the concern that I would have. And while I feel that Vic Fangio had one arm tied behind his back a little bit last night because of the injuries, and he blitzed Mahomes. At some point, Vic Fangio failed to find a way to beat Patrick Mahomes in the 6 times that he played him when he was head coach of the Broncos. The Eagles brought him in last year as a special consultant prior to the Super Bowl. Mahomes had a great game in that. And again, Mahomes looked more like Mahomes. I won't say it was vintage Mahomes, but if you are the Chiefs, you were certainly happy with how Rishi Rice performed. You're happy that he looked better than he had probably for most of the season. You're happy that Travis Kelce had a better game. Not a good game. He had some drops, but look, the weather being the way it was, I think some of those are more forgivable than they were previously. For the Dolphins, they're in this tough spot, right? Because it's kind of unfair to say, I think in some ways that they're soft, but equally, I don't think it's softness. I think that there's they need to add additional players to this. They need to take a step forward. The Cowboys were the only really quality team that they really looked good against this year. The Bills did a number on them earlier in the season when they didn't have those rash of injuries, and Tua's entering his 5th year. Like, what are they going to do there? Are they going to pay him? Are they going to just kind of do a Daniel Jones type situation where they run him back on the 5th year, and then they look to perhaps franchise tag him? You would have to say that they have been disappointing down the stretch. I think it's very easy to put it down to softness. The injuries, I think the way in which teams are able to react to them. Like Spags had a great game plan last night, and the Chiefs defense, like Nick Bolton being back, my goodness, he was immense. He made such a difference for the Chiefs.
Yeah, and like you were saying about the Dolphins earlier, I always think you can tell how much confidence a team is going into, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, based on the play design. And quite a lot of the plays that the Dolphins ran were these lateral type plays where they tried to make either a receiver or a running back who caught the ball basically parallel to the line of scrimmage or maybe a yard or two forward and let them carry. There was even, I think, a 4th and 16 try or 3rd and 16 try in the second half where they did that again and they gained like 3 or 4 yards. But the ability to pass it straight down the middle to try and go for those long plays just was not there. We saw it early on in the first half with Tyreek Hill's touchdown, which is obviously a nice point for him being able to do it back in the building in Arrowhead. But that was the only really good thing offensively I probably saw from the Dolphins all game. Kudos to the Chiefs defense. I mean, throughout the entire season, as much as we've constantly talked about Chiefs receivers dropping balls, not being able to get the run game going, Pacheco I thought was solid last night. Must be said. Most we talked about how Patrick Mahomes has developed throughout the season. The Chiefs' defense has always been the strong point. It's the one thing I think has been taken a step forward this year in comparison to last season, and that did show up in the first half, in particular last night against the Dolphins. But I think for Miami, it's a simple case where they went into this, and I think the media hype around them not being able to beat big teams, having to go into Arrowhead, the weather, everything else psychologically must have gotten to them because, like you said, the Cowboys were the only team above 500 that managed to defeat the season. That was by a score of 2 points against the Chiefs in Frankfurt earlier this season. As you were there, you'd know better than I would, but they did not have a solid offensive plan coming into this. They were not prepared enough, and I don't know whether there's questions coming in now, maybe not of Mike McDaniel, but of other people inside the coaching room as to how well these Dolphins are being prepared. Because when they're coming up against a team where they have a reason to be confident, they have swagger. We saw that how they beat up on the Jets, how they beat up on the Patriots, how they beat up on a few other teams that they're quite clearly better than in terms of level of talent on both sides of the ball. But when it comes to these tough challenges, which you have to be able to do to compete in the NFL, it doesn't matter what team it is. You have to be able to go into Arrowhead and win every now and again. You have to be able to get a win over the Buffalo Bills, your biggest rivals in the AFC East, or at least be able to stick it up to them so that, in the first game against the Bills this season, the Bills hammered the Dolphins. They were far better. And in the second game, I always say when I used to coach is that if we're going to lose, don't lose because we lost it. Lose because they beat us. And the Dolphins lost that game against the Buffalo Bills in the last game of the season. They just were not good enough to stick it up to a Bills team, which was generally fortunate. So I think the Dolphins have a lot of questions to ask themselves in the offseason. They quite clearly have enough talent there to push on the next step forward. But I think what they could do with it is a couple of players in that locker room who's been there, done that, managed to get things over the line, and it's just a sense of toughness because I felt like every stereotype that we always associate with the Miami Dolphins came true last night in terms of not being able to put it up to big teams, not being able to be confident in the cold weather and only be good in the Florida heat, all that kind of stuff. And I just was not impressed by the team because I picked them. I thought they'd come back from the defeat against Buffalo and put it up to them. And I thought the Chiefs, in fairness to them, I thought the Chiefs would be worse on defense. Or sorry, on offense. Patrick Mahomes, I thought was very good at escaping the pocket last night and being able to escape from the 4-man rush a couple of times. The Dolphins, I thought, I just feel were not impressive. And I have a lot of questions to ask themselves now that their season is over.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with your points there, Shane. I think the fact that at one point this season, obviously they put 70 up on the Broncos. They looked absolutely incredible in September, but then they shipped 56 to the Ravens, and they looked absolutely all at sea in the do or die game. Essentially, their last kind of 2 weeks were almost playoff games, right? Because they had the opportunity at home. If they were to beat the Bills, they were going to clinch the division. They were ahead all season, and they couldn't get it done, despite the fact that Josh Allen had such a chaotic game. So I do think there are questions, and I know the injuries, but I do think there are questions on the defensive side of the ball that have to be addressed. Offensively, yeah, look, they've got that decision about Tua, but it felt last night like outside of the pass to Hill. which was underthrown. Like it felt that their kind of downfield game just did not exist at all. It was all kind of screens for the most part. They were not taking shots. That is something that has to change. Look, Mike McDaniel is a fantastic play caller. He gets the off season. It's a long off season, as we all know in the NFL, to go away and to try and scheme stuff up. But it will be interesting to see, do they look to get this done with Tua, or are they going to let it run and see how it goes next year? And it will be year 3 of the Mike McDaniel tenure there next year. So I think there will be expectations. This is like last year, they went into the game, they were beaten up, Tua was missing, and they gave a really good account of themselves. No one had any expectations, but ultimately they have fallen at the first hurdle in the playoffs. I think fans will expect more next year. Can they deliver on those expectations?
Yeah, one thing about the Dolphins that you have to look forward to is the fact, I think, for the first time in the Mike McDaniel era, they will have a first round pick. And the first round pick this year that has been lining up the league and has reminded me so much about why I love football is CJ Stroud. I just cannot get enough of watching this guy. And the Houston Texans came into what was originally looked like a shootout in Texas between Houston and Cleveland, but it ended up being a 45-14 win to the men from the AFC South. And look, I was keeping an eye at the start of this game, and the Browns seemed to have a good handle on this game early on. They managed to get 14-10 up with, I think, only 3 minutes into the second quarter. Joe Flacco was going for these downfield passes as he does. He was connected in the center and on the wings. And I noticed last time when the Browns came to Houston in the regular season, I think it was in week 40 or 15 or 16. Fair enough, CJ Stroud wasn't playing that day, but what was the difference there is the fact that the cornerbacks for Houston and could not cover Flacco's ability to pass it out to the wings, to find his man near the touchline, and then they managed to go and get the scores and get the yards. The difference here is that when the game really turned, it was 2 almost back-to-back interceptions that Joe Flacco threw. One, which is a pass to the left-hand side in the wing, which was underthrown. I think he was trying to get it out of the sideline. He wasn't trying to pick out a man, but under pressure from guys behind him, he underthrew it. It was picked off and returned for a pick six. And then later on, he does the same thing on the right-hand side. He tries to find a man in the wing to carry the ball. It was well read by the Houston defense, taken in the hands, returned for a pick six. This was a game where Houston executed everything brilliantly. And I don't think we will see a performance like this, particularly from a team that is riding with a rookie quarterback and a rookie head coach. And it's so many question marks over going into the postseason that managed to execute everything in their plan so well as Houston did against Cleveland, because offensively, they managed to get the run game going, the pass game going. Defensively, they got stops after they let in the second touchdown. They didn't let in another score. Joe Flacco found it very difficult to move the ball, more difficult than he did in the earlier part of the game. And, those interceptions they bring back for the pick sixes help really build a complete win for the Houston Texans. And the question mark is whether or not they can be as complete going into the next round, whoever it is that Houston plays against, because the level of execution they had last night against Cleveland was second to none. I haven't seen a team execute like that from start to finish in a long time.
Yeah, they were immensely impressive, Shane. They really put on a clinic. Stroud was fantastic. Nico Collins was brilliant. The defense was just, they got to the ball time and time and time again, and it was a great plan. Now, I'm not. I'm surprised that they executed it so well, but I'm not surprised that D'Amico Ryans was able to come up with a good game plan. I always felt that the Browns' victory a few weeks ago, the Texans were going to learn more from that than the Browns did. And Amari Cooper had such a big game in that it was always going to be very difficult to replicate it. And so the Texans ensured, right, that he wasn't going to have that again. He wasn't going to be able to take the top off and they got to Flacco, particularly obviously in the second half. He took a couple of big hits. You saw the guy do some breakdancing on his helmet. I mean, they get some home decisions? Sure, but were they the better team and did they deserve to win? Yes, absolutely. Um, I think what you also saw was Miles Garrett hasn't been right ever since that injury against Denver. And going up against Laramie Tunsil, that was a huge issue. Tunsil went out at one point. That could have been a huge concern if he hadn't been able to come back in, but he did. And the fact that they were able to pull their starting QB with 8 minutes remaining in the fourth quarter, my goodness. Stroud was absolutely magnificent. No nerves, no jitters. Rookie head coach, rookie QB, and they put on an absolute clinic. I was listening a couple of weeks ago, and Kevin Clark on his podcast kind of talked about, well, what are the next pieces that they need to do, and maybe they should go out and spend the draft capital, because remember they have another first coming their way from that Deshaun Watson trade, a first and a third. So things are very bright, however this season ends up. And he was initially saying, yeah, go out, get a number one receiver. And then somebody kind of contacted the show over the next week and said, well, why can't Nico Collins and Tank be 1 and 2? Maybe you can supplement it. But we saw last night, Nico Collins certainly not overawed, going up against what is a really good pass defense. And he came up big. I mean, if Stroud hadn't overthrown him at one point, that could have been what a touchdown. But CJ Stroud is a superstar. He processes so well and so quickly. He adjusts to what defenses are trying to do. And for the Texans, they're going to hope that they can keep this run going, because I think Bobby Slowick is going to be a head coach in this league probably this offseason. With what he's been able to do there, he is so exciting, and I think that that means that he won't be around there for too long. But with D'Amico, with CJ Stroud, with Will Anderson, and what they have to reinforce, they will be. I think that the future is so bright, and it's interesting that this is a team who obviously had, went out and got Brock Osweiler, paid huge money to bring him in. That turned into an abject disaster. Then there was the Deshaun Watson years, and then that ends awfully. Then you have Davis Mills, you have the way in which they treat the head coaches. But one thing, Shane, that probably deserves mention is the fact that they rid themselves of Jack Easterby. And all of a sudden, things got a whole lot brighter in Texas, in Houston. And I think that is something that, because the Palace intrigue, the backstabbing, the infighting, the leaks, everything else that we saw, all of a sudden, that all disappeared. Is that a coincidence when Jack Easterby left the building that all that went away? Who knows?
Yeah, it all depends on whether or not you believe in coincidences. And look, after two quite impressive wins for those AFC teams, if you are a fan of the Green Bay Packers or the Detroit Lions, I have good news for you. I'm 0-2 in my picks so far, and I picked the Cowboys and the Rams to win. So I'm sure if you're a Packers or a Lions fan, you're probably riding high that I could keep my 100% record. We were talking there about head coaching roles and the fact that this offseason has been things have moved quite quickly throughout this week in terms of the coaching world. And one thing that I don't think we've touched on in this show yet, and I'm obviously going to bring up because I'm a Patriots fan, is the fact that Gerard Mayo was quite swiftly brought in as the new head coach of the New England Patriots. For me, this is a bit of a surprise. I think it was a surprise for a lot of people in Patriots Nation because it was kept quite secret that it was in his contract that he would replace Bill Belichick. And the fact that Bill Belichick was the original plan for the Patriots, that Belichick would be coach for the 2024 season and then naturally handed off to Gerard Mayo. And this is just a process that was sped up. It wasn't anything, it wasn't a firing or, well, not an old-fashioned firing and long search for a head coach. So I think this is an interesting pick because it's somebody who is in the building, somebody who was a linebackers coach for the Patriots, has never been a coordinator. which adds question marks. I think it's a it's somewhat, I think, it's traditional, I guess, or expected that a head coach has some form of experience as a coordinator somewhere else. It's almost like it's the natural progression up. And for him to skip that step, I think is an interesting point. And it obviously shows the confidence that Belichick and the Kraft family and people in the Patriots organization have in Gerard Mayo to move things forward. The fact that he's a defensive coach is a good thing because it's coming from within the Belichick framework. If we hired a defensive coach from outside, from somebody else, that would not have been a decision I would have liked, because offensive head coaches are the ones that are getting the best results in this league. But if you're going to go with a defensive head coach, you might as well get one that you know that was been working with the defense, which this season has not really been the problem for the Patriots. But the question mark is now, there's a lot of talk about whether the Patriots will get a GM. There was question marks going around yesterday that the Patriots might wait till after the draft to get a general manager, which is just insane. Which I'm hoping is nonsense talk that is floating around the Boston media, which would not be the first thing, would not be the first thing or the first time that's happened. But I want to know what your view is. Obviously, as somebody who is not a Patriots fan, do you think Gerard Mayo has the potential to be a good choice going forward? Because here's a man who is within the Belichick framework, but has been given the poison chalice. Are we looking at the next Bill Belichick, or are we looking at the Patriots version of David Moyes?
Well, I think, yeah, like the anointment of Mayo would concern me a little bit. That doesn't mean that it can't work out, but I think a number of different factors, right? As you said, this was in the contract, which is why they were allowed to go ahead without an interview process. But did in doing that, Shane, and people kind of will go, oh, it was planning ahead, it was ensuring there was a succession plan. But did that undermine Bill Belichick this year? Like, to have, his kind of successor waiting there. The people knew that ultimately Bill was going to move on, and they knew exactly who was going to replace him. It does go back. I mean, you're talking about David Moyes and Ferguson. Manchester United learned no real lessons from the fact that Ferguson had announced his retirement a decade prior to when he did go, and played out a final season before deciding to come back. And he totally undermined himself. But did the Patriots undermine Bill Belichick by making Mayo successor? Now, I haven't got to read it, but I was listening to a couple of podcasts while I was walking Sheriff this morning, and they were talking. There's a Seth Wickersham who tends to be pretty good on the Patriots. There were piece out there all about this, and apparently Mayo was bringing a baseball bat to meetings and kind of tapping it in a way to kind of some sort of mafia-esque effort to
stamp your authority early. I say that's
yeah,
bizarre.
like, I mean, this is like something out of The Simpsons. Like, that's a paddling.
Get my Red Sox hat ready. Maybe is that it? Maybe he's just a big fan of the Red Sox, which I somehow doubt.
So I do find that one a little bit strange. And the other pieces, they kind of they're talking more all about continuity. Now, one of the comments that I did see from Mayo that I did like was that he talked about diversity of ideas, diversity of voices, diversity of opinions. And I hope they go down that route, because my concern would be that they continue, like, they're so obsessed with the Patriots way. And I know they do things differently in that building in comparison to how things are done in other places. And they seem to be keen to bring in a GM. But the worry about it, would be, are they just going to go with another former Patriot? I think it would be good to see some new ideas come into the building. And that by going this route, you kind of close all of that off. So that would be my only concern. But look, it's going to be different no matter what, because Bill Belichick is no longer there. Will very likely be coaching elsewhere next year. Kraft even talked about that in the press conference. It seems over the past week as well, Shane, that Pete Carroll, despite talk about potentially moving upstairs, the talk now is that he may end up coaching elsewhere as well. And I guess that shouldn't be that much of a surprise when those guys are a mere 72 years of age, and the two likeliest candidates for the US presidential elections are considerably older. So why shouldn't you have NFL head coaches in their 70s? So certainly plenty to keep an eye on. I have to say, given Robert Kraft's history with the league, I think that might be another factor in wanting there to be a succession plan like this of sorts. He I think gets pretty fed up with the league a lot of the time, and I think the league have implemented rules and slowed the process down, right? Because if you go back, the way in which, say, the Patriots appointed Mayo like the day after they announced Belichick is moving on, like stuff like that used to be far more common, in that there was kind of almost gentlemen's agreements, a nod and a wink. Somebody'd be fired, and all of a sudden 2 days later, oh look, here it is. And you saw that, and I had Steve O'Rourke on the podcast a while back, and we talked a little bit about the way that kind of Mark Davis had given the game away when he talked about the fact that with John Gruden and with Josh McDaniels, he had decided that they were the guys before the interviews even took place. And so that is, what he kind of put in place there. It was a sham process. It was, like, you have to call it what it is. The league have taken steps to avoid that, right? Because it's so unfair on everyone else coming into the building, wasting their time preparing for interviews when they don't really have a shot. Hey, we had the Bill Belichick, Brian Flores debacle as well. So the league have kind of ensured that they're taking it away from the teams in some ways. They're slowing the process down. They're forcing accountability. Why did you make this decision? And I think that is probably a good thing that the league is doing that. So that is, I think, but I think this is Bobby Kraft looking at it and saying, I'm going to do things my way. By writing this in, I ensured I didn't have to follow a process. I got to do my process the way I wanted to do things.
The Patriot way. Just moving on to another AFC East team, which I think is worth touching on. In Western New York, I know there's quite a lot of snow. What was originally hoped, I think a lot of NFL parties tonight were originally meant to start at 6 o'clock. We're going to have to wait till 9:30 now, lads, because the Steelers and the Bills will not be playing until Monday evening at 9:30 our time, 4:30 in Western New York. I just want to touch on it very quickly because Roy Fitzgerald asked us if there is a question marks over whether this game could be moved, possibly even to next weekend, or what kind of way that this game being moved to Monday will have a knock-on effect on how whoever wins the game, whether it's the Bills or Steelers, will pair in for the next week, for the following week. It's also worth mentioning as well, I see online floating around a lot of videos from Highmark Stadium in Buffalo, and the weather last night was just, you could not see. It was quite a clear winter storm, snowstorm. I can understand maybe why Governor Kathy Hochul, from a safety point of view, probably didn't want fans traveling, because I know a lot of the talk around this is, oh, well, if Bills are building a new stadium, why aren't you building one with the roof? Do you want the elements to be a factor or not? And I think the question mark is actually safety, getting to the stadium rather than the conditions in there itself. But the weather was quite bad, far worse than it was. I mean, I thought the fog here in Carlow was terrible last night, but when you see what's happening in Buffalo, you realize how tempered things are here. But I think the question mark here now is, we were talking about the Steelers maybe having a chance of winning this game here because of the weather, because they could, as you put it during the week, Mike Tomlin will be happy to stick the ball with the jumper. And now that if it's given a couple of days for the snow to subside a little bit, that could suit the Buffalo more. So is that the case now? And if not, what way does this game being moved what way does that knock on in terms of the AFC race? Because the other AFC teams played yesterday. No AFC teams are playing on Sunday, and whoever wins this will be playing on Monday. That's a 2-day gap between the the winners of this game and if they play somebody who won yesterday, which is quite significant. Now, probably won't matter as much if the Steelers win and they end up going in to play Baltimore because Baltimore had the bye week anyway. But it's still going to be a significant talking point, I think.
It will be in ways, Shane, but we've seen this. The NFL a lot of the time, I suppose there's kind of minimum. But Rory's is it's a fair question to raise, but I think the league is going to do what the league wants to do, and we have seen this before, right? Where teams have had games moved during the regular season and then have had to play, on a Saturday or a Sunday and without rest, and we've equally seen teams traveling and the amount of travel that a team has to do, or teams having 3 games at home to finish the season, as opposed to a team having to play 3 games on the road. So, alas, unless there is another kind of weather system that moves in, and a lot of this was because essentially you're going to have 70,000 people trying to get to the stadium in a blizzard, and the blizzard conditions, whiteout conditions, we don't tend to have them here, fortunately, but whiteout conditions when you're on a highway in America are lunacy, and you're already trying, emergency services are stretched, so they move the game more because of the number of people getting to the stadium than anything else. That's the reason they do that, because how do you deal if you get a pile up on a highway? You could be talking about 400 cars potentially, impacted, like 50 cars in the collision, then the cars behind them, and then the backup into that. So it can get very crazy very quickly. But the Bills are the chaos team anyway, so I don't think it's going to particularly matter. And the Steelers, it's an interesting one, because there's been a report over the past couple of days that Mike Tomlin is going to take some time at the end of the season to think about what's next. That doesn't mean he's definitely stepping away, but this was a report from Florio that came out, but saying that, he wants to assess where he wants to go, and does he want to continue this. I think that's interesting. I mean, Mike Tomlin has been Steelers head coach for an awfully long time, but he's still a relatively young guy, and maybe he does, want to step back, but at the same time, he's so enmeshed in the Steelers culture. That's what he's known for. But I did think that was interesting, that kind of came out, and what that might mean, and how that impacts the players as well. And is that something that has been floating around for a little bit? But ultimately, what's going to happen is that this game is going to get played on Monday, and then they're going to run it back as normal for next week. The way it's set out currently is the way they will intend to do it. But that, of course, is subject. It's a time of the year where you can get crazy weather events. So, but as we know, Buffalo is an area that, has gone through these before. They played games away from their home stadium last year. So all things are possible. But as things stand, I would expect the next weekend's fixtures to go ahead as normal.
Yeah, why didn't they move to Detroit like they did in the regular season last year? Is it not good enough for the playoffs? Anybody ask the NFL that? Well, listen, Colin, thanks very much for joining me this morning as we reviewed a couple of things. It's worth mentioning as well, for those who have not known, that we have an evening with NBC's Peter King live in Dublin on Thursday the 28th of March. You will find tickets for the show, which is live on Buskers on the Ball on Thursday the 28th of March in our Twitter links below. Colin, I hope you enjoy the games tonight. We'll be staying up late for the Cowboys and Packers, and then for the Rams and Lions. So, Slán August. I was going to say Bonnock, but that's good night. I can't remember what good morning is. I did ordinary level.